5:30 this evening. Level 5 lockdown to be with us for some time yet. The Taoiseach warns people against expecting a quick easing of measures.
There's no talk at the moment in terms of any relaxation or reversing of restrictions at the end of this month, and I think we are looking at a continuation of restrictions into February.
Concern too about a delayed reopening of schools. There's fresh pressure this evening on the Education Minister to make a call on this year's state exams.
She needs to make an early announcement about the Leaving Cert and Junior Cert and end the uncertainty, which is an absolute torture for the students who are waiting.
The burden increases on the country's intensive care units. A HSE warning around sustaining safe levels of care and an alert around the staff numbers out of work because of COVID.
In the acute hospitals alone, we have over 6,000 workers on sick leave at present.
Momentum growing towards tighter controls on arrivals into the country in a desperate bid to stem transmission rates. And hundreds more fines issued for breaches of the 5-kilometre travel rule. Takeaway pickups and buying pets among the excuses Gardaí are given. Good evening. The Taoiseach has again warned the public against expecting any early easing of our current COVID lockdown, saying this evening there is no talk at the moment of any relaxation or reversal of the restrictions at the end of this month. The Cabinet will decide how to proceed early next week, but Micheál Martin warned we're looking at a continuation of restrictions into February. It comes as the HSE expressed renewed alarm over the mounting pressure on intensive care units in the country's hospitals, with the head, Paul Reid, saying staff are battling hard to sustain safe levels of care.
As the situation in our hospitals remains precarious this evening, the Taoiseach has again indicated that we shouldn't expect restrictions to be eased at the end of next week.
Certainly there is no talk at the moment in terms of any relaxation or reversing of restrictions at the end of this month, and I think we are looking at a continuation of restrictions into February, and I think you can take it that we'll take stock every 4 weeks of the situation.
Although the R number has fallen to between 0.5 and 0.8, we're still seeing the effects of high levels of community transmission in our hospital and ICU admissions. The head of the HSE, Paul Reid, tweeting today that they've never seen such a high proportion of patients in ICU being treated for the same illness, adding, "We're battling hard to sustain safe levels of care, but it's getting harder. 300 patients are also receiving respiratory support outside of ICU. Nothing is more serious." And today at the Oireachtas Health Committee, HSE officials laid bare the current situation in our hospitals.
The situation we are facing now is very different to that of March and in many ways more challenging. The disease is much more transmissible. Backlogs have built up in scheduled care. Social distancing and increased infection control measures mean that our existing capacity cannot deliver at previous levels. Significant numbers of healthcare workers are absent due to infection or close contact or the need to care for others. In the acute hospitals alone, we have over 6,000 workers on sick leave at present.
The HSE also warning today that we're very near our total ICU capacity of 350, while NPHET says we've a long way to go to get back to the level of reopening of society we've seen before. The focus is now on further restrictions for travel, including whether we could introduce mandatory quarantine for those arriving into the country without a negative test. NPHET has previously recommended it and said today its position hasn't changed. And while the Tanaistes said yesterday that it was disproportionate and not possible due to our open border, it's now being given serious consideration. Nicole Gernan, Virgin Media News.
Well, let's get more now on the Taoiseach's comments this evening. Our political correspondent Gavin Riley was among the group he spoke to at government buildings today. And Gavin, he was questioned about growing demands for mandatory quarantine for anyone arriving into the country.
That's right. That's something that NPHET have been looking for around 8 months now, Geraldine, but it's something that the government has always held off on because they didn't believe it would be effective unless it was applied in Northern Ireland too, because if you had mandatory quarantine for international arrivals into the Republic, then many people could simply fly unencumbered into Belfast and drive south without there being any major hindrance at all. That has led to the government believing that only a two-island solution would work if it were to work at all, but the Taoiseach did confirm to us and a few other media outlets this evening that it is something that Ireland has discussed with several ministers within the UK government.
Yeah, that work, I will have further discussions that I know the Minister for Health has been talking to Minister Hancock about that. I know the two transport ministers have been talking about it. I spoke to Arlene Foster and Michelle O'Neill about this. Last week we had a meeting. We're not in a position to seal the entire border. There's never been a policy position to seal the island either. So therefore the two-island context is one that could be pursued.
And Gavin, he was also pressed on the latest position regarding schools, especially special education.
That's right. This, of course, in the whole light of the idea that although lockdown is officially supposed to expire on Monday the 1st, and that was also intended to be the day in which a lot of schools would return, that nobody really expects there to be any lifting of lockdown. As you heard the Taoiseach say in Nicole's report, it'll probably be about 4 weeks, meaning well into March, before there's any exit from level 5. That led to questions around what that means for schooling and some of the other sectors which are still allowed to continue on a very limited basis, such as construction. And when we asked whether schools would be still reopening on February the 1st, as indicated, the Taoiseach didn't say yes or didn't say no, but did say that there was another priority group that would have to be dealt with first and foremost.
I met with the Minister of Education and her officials this morning, with my officials to take stock. They are continuing to work, the Minister is, with the partners in education. They all still share an objective, a combined objective, to make provision for children with special needs as soon as that's possible. That work is ongoing. On the wider schools issue, that will be discussed by the Cabinet Committee on Monday.
Now, the Taoiseach's precedence that he set out there is pretty interesting because, again, he wasn't asked specifically about the fate of students with special educational needs. He was asked about schooling overall, and in 2 different occasions he referred immediately back to the need to prioritise those pupils with SEN. Now, that is interesting because, as we know, there is still an ongoing impasse with unions and the government about when schooling can reopen for those pupils. It is unlikely at this short notice to be any time that next week. That would mean that at the very, very earliest, pupils with special educational needs would be going back to school on February the 1st. That, of course, would be pending any agreement with unions. If they are only going back on February 1st, the other broader student body would not be going back on that date. So clearly they would not be expected to go back now on Monday week as the government officially plans.
OK, Gavin, thank you. So the fresh doubt about reopening schools has prompted renewed calls for a quick and early decision on this year's leaving and junior cert exams. Aisling Ní Coistle is at the Department of Education for us tonight. And Aisling, those demanding an early call on this summer's exams say time is running out.
Yeah, they sure do, Geraldine. That date of the 1st of February now extremely unlikely that the schools will reopen, following the Taoiseach's comments and also following comments from Dr Colm Henry from the HSE earlier today. He said our transmission levels are too high to reopen our schools. They're about 10 times higher now than they were at the start of December, and he said they would need to reduce to a much lower level before we could see students, parents and teachers return to that traditional school setting. All of these comments today have now led to renewed calls for Minister Norma Foley to make a decision in relation to the Leaving Cert, to make it soon and to communicate that decision to the thousands of Leaving Cert students across the country.
Well, it does appear increasingly unlikely that a return to school will happen as planned on the 1st of February, and probably not for the entire month of February, which means the Minister now needs to make some serious decisions. She needs to make an early announcement about the Leaving Cert and Junior Cert and end the uncertainty, which is an absolute torture for the students who are waiting for a decision from the Minister for Education.
The vast majority of students whom I have spoken to and have made their position known publicly, they don't believe that they're in a position to sit the traditional Leaving Cert.
If the schools remain closed for the next few weeks, it brings us up to a time where orals and practicals and mocks should be taking place. There's approximately 61,000 Leaving Cert students. They're very vocal in what they want the Minister to do. They say they want the same options as last year's Leaving Cert class had, either predictive grades or sitting their traditional exam later on in the year.
A finalised decision does need to be made as soon as possible. You know, it's not really fair that we're being left in the dark. We need something solid that will accommodate everyone. We can't wait till the 8th of May like last year had to do. That wasn't fair on them and it wouldn't be fair on us. We do need to be a government priority.
Well, it's not ideal for any student, be you a junior infant or a Leaving Cert student, to be out of school for any prolonged period of time, but there is a greater urgency for students with special needs and for Leaving Cert students. The focus now for the government is the special needs schools and classes, but the broader issue of reopening all schools will be discussed at the Cabinet Subcommittee on Monday of next week.
OK, Aisling, thank you for that. The HSE has issued a fresh alert today about the situation in the country's intensive care units. Earlier we heard Paul Reid warning that they've never seen such a high proportion of patients in ICU being treated for the same illness. Well, Richard Chambers is at the Department of Health and joins us now. Richard, how close are we to capacity in our ICUs?
Chair, Paul Reid describing a situation in our hospitals which he has described as increasingly perilous. That is not a word you want to hear the head of the HSE using. He was particularly focusing in on the situation in intensive care units. He says, of course, that 219 people in ICU with COVID, 336 beds in total have now been opened across ICUs. 350 is the absolute max which the HSE has set out before outcomes cannot be guaranteed and the standard of care does drop off. So that is very, very concerning at this point. The HSE today at the Oireachtas Health Committee spelling out the situation, particularly around outbreaks of COVID in hospitals. Some 442 cases acquired in hospital over the week up until the 17th of January with 120 open outbreaks. And given all that, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Ronan Glynn, says it's far too soon to be talking about reopening the country.
We have a long way to go before we get back to a level of reopening that we've seen previously. I suppose I'd emphasise at all times that from my perspective, I don't believe that there's too much value at this point, given the pressures on our health service, of looking too far back in history or indeed looking too far forward. Sure. I think at the moment we really need to focus on the next days and weeks.
And Richard, some very worrying news out of the UK tonight about the variant of virus first detected there.
Yes, Chair. Well, this is at a press conference hosted by the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Chief Scientific Advisor. They have said that there is growing evidence that there is an increased risk of fatalities with the new UK strain, which it has been forecast by NEFA to become the dominant strain in this country. Sir Patrick Vallance, the Chief Scientific Advisor in the UK, said that, for example, for people in their 60s, you could expect with the original strain of COVID, 10 out of every 1,000 people to die there. With the new strain, the UK variant, that number increases to 13 or 14. That is some very worrying news. He also said that there is some growing concern about whether or not the South African strain or the Brazilian strain may be more or less susceptible to the vaccines.
OK, Richard, thank you. Vaccine maker AstraZeneca has warned EU countries this evening it will fail to meet delivery timetables for its product. Our economics correspondent Paul Colgan is here with more on this. And Paul, another blow to an already troubled rollout of vaccines.
Yes, this vaccine has been described by the Taoiseach as the game changer. It is the one that will really ramp up our vaccination programme once it's authorised by the European Medicines Agency. And the Financial Times this evening is reporting that AstraZeneca has informed the European Commission that there will be problems over the coming weeks when it comes to distributing and manufacturing these vaccines, certainly in the volumes that had been promised. Now, AstraZeneca is quoted as saying that initial volumes will be lower than originally anticipated. So this is something that could prove problematic for our own vaccination programme. The European Medicines Agency is expected to sign off on this vaccine next week, and we were expecting to see deliveries mid-February. So it's unclear whether those deliveries will be significantly affected. The Financial Times is reporting European Commission officials are saying it will be significant as far as they can tell, but it's still unclear and it's unconfirmed. But this really would help push forward our vaccination programme. At the moment, we're authorised to use the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, but not the Oxford vaccine. It is being deployed in the north, where over 150,000 people have so far received their first dose of a vaccine. And the key to the Oxford vaccine is that it can be stored and distributed quite easily, whereas the Pfizer and Moderna ones need very cold storage, and there's certain issues around the distribution. So it remains to be seen and confirmed as to what the impact will be. But you heard the Health Minister just yesterday saying that the plan is to have all adults in the state vaccinated by September. We'll have to see whether this has a significant impact on that timeline and whether it pushes it out any further. OK, Paul, thank you. Gardaí have confirmed that almost 1,000 fines have been issued to people for breaching the 5-kilometre travel rule around non-essential travel. Well, Paul Quinn is at Garda headquarters for us. Paul, hundreds more fines issued since the last update from Gardaí.
Yes, Ger. So these fines came into effect on Monday of last week. Now, Monday of this week, we were told that 400 have been issued. Today, that's almost 1,000. Around 770 of them have already been issued. Another 200 are still being processed. And Gardaí said that for the majority of them, they're people who are breaching the 5 kilometres for exercise or who are going to beauty spots, mountains, beaches, places like that. But Gardaí said they're also seeing people continue to travel long distances to buy burgers and chips. They're seeing people travelling to other counties to buy pets, and indeed others who are travelling long distances, some from one part of the country to the other, to visit their boyfriend or girlfriend who they haven't seen in some time. Now, if we take a look at the breakdown of the fines that have been processed so far, where they're located, 99 of them were in the northwest region. In Dublin, 144, 315 in the eastern region, while in the southern region there were 213. Now, another 30 fines, have also been issued to people who've refused to wear face masks. The majority of them are in shops, retail outlets, and of course the fine there is €80. Now, Gardaí this evening also reminding people that if you are caught more than 5 kilometres from your home, that it's not just the driver of the car who's liable to be fined, but all adult passengers will also be fined. The same goes for cyclists or pedestrians who are breaching the restrictions. Now, they do say that the majority of people are adhering to the regulations. However, some continue to flout them. They say they'll be out in force this weekend, and they're urging people to stay home.
OK, Paul, thank you for that. A 14-year-old boy is still being questioned this evening in connection with the knife attack on a 48-year-old woman near Dublin city centre earlier this week. The victim is understood to remain critically ill. Our crime correspondent, Sarah O'Connor, has more.
Well, that 14-year-old boy continues to be questioned this evening by Gardaí investigating that vicious and very serious attack on a 48-year-old woman near the IFSC on Wednesday night. He was arrested in the North Inner City last night. He's being held at Store Street Garda Station, where he can be questioned for up to 24 hours. And the victim of this attack remains in a critical condition in the Mater Hospital this evening, where she continues to fight for her life. She was making her way home from work on Wednesday night at around 9:30. She was walking along the George's Dock area near the IFSC when a male approached her on a push bike. He demanded money from her. When she said she didn't have any, he stabbed her in the neck and fled the scene. She still managed to make her way to nearby Amiens Street, where she was due to meet her husband. She was coherent enough at that stage. Emergency services were called. She was able to talk to the Gardaí and the paramedics. It told them what happened to her. But she took a turn for the worst. Her condition deteriorated on her way to the Mater Hospital, and she had to undergo emergency surgery, and she remains in a critical condition this evening. Gardaí are appealing for witnesses. The 14-year-old boy suspected of carrying out this attack continues to be questioned this evening. A decision will be made overnight on whether to charge or release him.
Sarah O'Connor there. A 48-year-old Dublin man who brandished what appeared to be a firearm and an explosive device in a courtroom will be sentenced next week. Gardaí from the Armed Response Unit and an armed bomb disposal team were called to the scene in 2018. Our courts reporter Deborah Naylor has more.
Dublin Circuit Criminal Court heard there were 17 minutes of terror and panic when Edmund Dunnican brandished what appeared to be a firearm and an explosive device during proceedings in a courtroom. When the judge asked him what he had around his neck, he replied, "You don't want to know." It had all the markings of an explosive device, but it was in fact a fake bomb that he had made from instructions on Google. In his hand was a realistic imitation firearm. Gardaí were alerted to the situation in the courtroom. An audio recording of the incident was played at the sentence hearing today. Detective Garda Shane Connolly, seen here emerging first, gave evidence that the defendant pointed the imitation firearm at a woman and spoke about it being her last day. She described being petrified and thought she was going to die. The court registrar pressed the panic alarm, which was protocol during a siege situation, and Gardaí from the Armed Support Unit entered the scene. After 10 minutes of negotiations, the accused with a prior address at Unit 14C, Stadium Bus Park, Ballycoolan in Dublin 15, eventually put down the weapon. He was arrested and a controlled explosion was carried out on the suspect device. Edmund Dunnican pleaded guilty to carrying a firearm with criminal intent. His lawyer said today her client accepted that this was a serious offence. She said that he was under immense stress at the time and these were the actions of a desperate man. The court heard the 48-year-old cooperated fully with Gardaí and has no previous convictions. Judge Patricia Ryan will sentence him next week. Deborah Naylor, Virgin Media News at Dublin Circuit Criminal Court.
Now, coming up next on the news at 5:30, calls for more help to be given to the elderly during lockdown. And injury blow for Manchester City. They will be without midfielder Kevin De Bruyne for 4 to 6 weeks.
After the nighttime feed, your baby's tummy expands. But as they sleep, their belly contracts, which can make some ordinary nappies gap and leak. It's time for Pampers Pants, with 360 Fit that flexes to their shape, helping to prevent gaps and leaks for a peaceful night's sleep. Love the bellies. One Pampers equals one dry night.
Yakult, created from the mystical essence of the giant bonsai tree.
No.
Made by releasing the spirits of the beautiful god.
I'm not sure you're getting this.
Infused with the tranquil hum of the wise man.
Right, seriously, that's enough of that magical nonsense. Yakult was actually created by Japanese scientists using unique bacteria proven to reach the gut alive.
Our Spar range is growing every day. As good as the best, for less. Like Spar Still and Sparkling Water, 2 litre, only 49 cents each. Spar Toilet Tissue, 4 rolls, only €1. And Spar Spaghetti, 500 gram and Bolognese sauce range from 49 cents. Wherever you see the tree.
Each time you blink, think of Ruqaiya. Because for this little girl, each blink is torture. An infection called trachoma has turned her lashes inwards. Now each blink feels like thorns scratching her eyes. Each time you blink, think of Manaru, because every blink makes his world darker, makes it harder to read, write, or even go to school. He's in so much pain, and he desperately needs help. Just imagine what it's like for a child when each blink is agony, to lose your sight and face darkness and pain. Please, will you do something amazing to help them? Just call free on 1-800-839-910 and give €5 a month to Sightsavers. When you do, you'll help children in remote regions get the medicines, surgery and care that can cure trachoma. You'll be giving them back their sight, their childhoods, their joy, their futures. But please don't wait. Call Sightsavers now on 1-800-839-910. Text BLINK3 to 51155 or go online and give just €5 a month. Because each blink is torture for children like Ruqaiya. They need you to help save them from a life of blindness and pain.
Look who's back to tell you about Quote Devil's incredible insurance deals. Yes, you're on live TV. Home and contents insurance is now reduced to only €199, including accidental damage. Whoops. And you can get a quote in just 60 seconds. Car insurance starts at only €325. And we're specialists in young driver car insurance, cover for those with convictions or previous claims. 40% of people who call to better their car, van or home insurance renewal become our customers. So
call the Quote Devil for one hell of a quote.
Thank you very much.
Download the Just Eat app and get delivery like a G on Supermax, KFC and Romeo's.
Did somebody say just eat?
Meet Mr. Green, the gentleman who gives you more than just the drop of a ball or the turn of a card. Enjoy responsible entertainment whilst experiencing an award-winning casino with Mr. Green.
You're welcome back to the news at 5:30.